Donald Trump is going to do everything in his power to steal the 2026 midterm elections. It's potentially his last chance to seize absolute power and turn the United States of America into a competitive authoritarian state, much like Hungary, Turkey, and Russia. Inflation is high. The economy is slowing. We're entangled in multiple overseas conflicts. And yet, the other night, in a State of the Union address where he could have pivoted to almost anything else on earth, the President of the United States decided that one of his biggest moments was going to be the SAVE Act. Not wages, not strategy, paperwork. When a president sitting at 37% approval uses the largest stage in American politics to pre-argue who gets to cast a ballot, it's pretty obvious that he's doing survival math. And when that same president keeps saying elections are legitimate only when he likes the outcome, and that if they aren't, something else has to happen, he's telegraphing his real intent. So this isn't Trump said something wild again. It's a map. It's a map of what power does when losing power starts to look existential. I'm Rebecca Rowan, and this is For the Republic. So let's ground this before we spiral into the doom scroll abyss. You already know the broad strokes. Trump is polarizing. Election denial has become part of his political operating system, and we've been arguing about voter ID since the Bush years. Now, I'm not here to relitigate the last decade, but what matters right now is that we're in the run-up to the 2026 midterms. Now, historically, the president's party gets punished, losing House seats in 37 of the last 40 cycles. That's just the baseline gravity of politics. But Trump isn't just fighting gravity here. He's fighting the floor. In polls this week, he's at 37% approval and 60% disapproval, with 2/3 of independents, 66% disapproving of his performance. Those are, you're probably about to lose the House numbers. And the rhetoric has moved accordingly. It's shifted from ambient grievance to conditional legitimacy. On February 5th, he said he'd accept results only if honest, and if not, something else has to happen. On February 13th, he posted, "There will be voter ID for the midterms, whether approved by Congress or not." This is no longer hypothetical. The House passed the SAVE Act on February 11th. We're already seeing documented implementation burdens that would hit eligible citizens. We're already seeing federal agents at election hubs. Now, I want to be precise here. I am not saying that there's some magic red button in the Oval Office that's going to cancel democracy tomorrow morning. But what I am saying is that there is a strategy to shape the rules, the friction, and the fear level of the election before a single ballot has a chance to be cast. Now, Trump's 2026 strategy is best understood as a dead man's switch posture. If he can't guarantee a win in a normal election environment, he's trying to alter that environment preemptively through legal friction, legitimacy tests, and signals of intimidation. The danger isn't some movie scene coup with tanks on Pennsylvania Avenue. We've kind of evolved past that. The danger now is cumulative. Just cause enough confusion, enough fear, and enough administrative burden in enough places to move margins, just that much, and then launder that outcome as integrity. So start with motive. You don't need to be telepathic. All you need is to understand basic political arithmetic. Why now? Well, because for Trump, losing the House is existential in a way that it wasn't for Biden, Obama, Bush, or even Clinton. If Democrats take the House, investigations restart, subpoenas restart. The legislative shield wall thins out really quickly. And for a man whose political mythology depends on invulnerability, a midterm loss this year is not just a setback. Now, political scientist Barbara Walter has warned that parties facing demographic erosion often choose anti-democratic rule changes over persuasion. And so that's the bet. Because if you can't win the game as played, you might as well just modify the board. Trump sees 37% approval. He sees independents peeling away in real time. And he's concluding, probably correctly, that in a free, fair, high turnout election, he loses. So the incentive structure snaps into focus. Losing is intolerable, and losing is likely. So that's when would-be authoritarians like Donald Trump start reaching for the emergency glass. The unnerving part is that he's telling us this directly. Just look at the timeline from the last 6 weeks alone. On January 6th, yes, that date, he floated canceling the election. I won't say cancel the election, he said, but they should cancel the election. And it's a classic Trump move, right? Say it, deny it, plant the seed anyway, act like it was just memes, it's just a joke, right? But then February 5th, he said, I will accept the results if the elections are honest. And if not, then something else has to happen. Then, February 13th, there will be voter ID for the midterm elections, whether approved by Congress or not. Then, the other night at the State of the Union, the SAVE Act elevated as a central election policy priority in the State of the Union. So he's establishing in advance that a Republican win is the only mathematically fair result. If he wins, it's a mandate. If he loses, the fraud premise is already installed, the something else option is already rhetorically licensed, and the MAGA base has already been primed for years at this point to reject the results of any election they don't like in the first place. The SAVE Act was passed by the House on February 11th and is just one piece of this. On paper, it sounds pretty reasonable to a lot of people. Proof of citizenship to vote. But in practice, it requires documentary proof of citizenship, passport, birth certificate, or naturalization papers to even register. The Brennan Center estimates that 21 million eligible American citizens do not have ready access to those documents. So who gets hit? You get young voters, poor voters, elderly voters born in rural counties 70 years ago who don't have a birth certificate just sitting around. And what is this huge machinery supposedly solving? Non-citizen voting is already illegal, and it's also vanishingly rare. Even the Heritage Foundation's election fraud database shows only a tiny fraction of proven cases relative to billions of votes cast across decades. And this mismatch between problem and solution is the tell. You don't put 21 million citizens through that gauntlet to catch what amounts to a very tiny handful of bad actors. You do it because you suspect those citizens aren't likely to vote for you in the first place. Now, add intimidation. You don't always need a new law to suppress a vote. Sometimes you just need people to wonder whether showing up will put them or their family in danger. On February 3rd, Steve Bannon, not a government official, but very much the id of this movement, said on his podcast, "We're going to have ICE surround the polls come November." Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons walked it back before Congress, saying there's no reason for agents to be there. But notice what he didn't say. He didn't say it's prohibited. He didn't say we will not do it. And no publicly announced DHS policy has explicitly barred ICE presence at polling sites. The sensitive locations memo that used to protect schools and community centers from enforcement actions was rescinded in the administration's first days in January 2025. So now we're in strategic ambiguity territory. Will ICE be there? Maybe, maybe not. I bet they will. But if you're a naturalized citizen, like me, or you have undocumented family, or you're brown in a blue area, or you simply just don't want to navigate masked federal agents in tactical gear on your way to a library polling place, who, as we all know, have already snatched American citizens off the streets many times and have even killed American citizens. Do you roll those dice? That uncertainty is the suppression. And this isn't really abstract either, because we already saw a dry run. On January 28th, the FBI raided the Fulton County election hub in Georgia. They seized hundreds of boxes of 2020 records. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard was even there, personally requested by the president. So the threat has now shifted from just shitposting on a podcast to federal agents physically seizing election materials in a plurality Black county. Now put the pieces together. An openly authoritarian president facing a likely loss. A legislative push by a, to quote Gavin Newsom, supine Congress that could purge 21 million voters. A rhetorical setup that defines any loss as fraud, and physical insertion of federal law enforcement into election infrastructure. It's a coherent, adaptive strategy, a dead man's switch, where you wire the system so that a normal democratic loss triggers disruption. Now, to be fair, there is a strong counter argument here. The best case against this dead man's switch thesis is straightforward. American constitutional architecture is unusually resilient. It always has been. And we watched it hold in 2020. Elections are decentralized. States administer them. Courts have blocked parts of Trump's agenda. The SAVE Act still has to clear the Senate, which isn't necessarily looking likely. And in 2020, institutions did hold. Judges rejected spurious lawsuits. State officials certified results. The military stayed in the barracks, and the fake electors didn't succeed. This is all true, and it's why we're not currently living in a dictatorship. But in 2026, the danger isn't a single signature that cancels the election. Because you see, in 2020, Trump tried to overturn the results of the election after the votes were cast. He was improvising under pressure. But in 2026, he's pre-positioning leverage before votes are even cast. And he doesn't need total control to make it happen. He needs margin shaving in 5 or 6 swing districts. He needs confusion in Atlanta and Phoenix and Milwaukee, just long enough to gum up certification and force months of litigation. He needs just enough people to stay home because they heard that ICE might be near the polls at the library, and even though they're U.S. citizens, they don't want to be disappeared, even if it's just for a few days. So now let's zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture. This starts with normalization. Things that should trigger a 5-alarm response become a 2-day story, and then they disappear with another stunt or tantrum. The Fulton County raid should have been a national scandal. Bannon threatening ICE around polls should have triggered a categorical, no ambiguity denunciation from congressional Republicans and the president himself. But instead, we just got a soft walkback. And that's how the window shifts. Barbara Walters' warning applies here too. When a party faces long-term demographic decline, it has 2 choices. It can either broaden its appeal or rig the game. And what we've seen from the GOP is that they've looked at the trajectory, a shrinking white Christian base, rising diverse electorate, and they've made their choice. All the gains that they made with minorities and the diverse population of Americans has been squandered by Trump's antics over the past year. So the GOP are betting on exhaustion. They're betting that if they add just enough friction, just enough fear, you'll decide to stay home to save yourself and your family the trouble. But here's the thing about bets. They can lose. The same numbers making Trump desperate, 37% approval and independent revolt, also show a majority still exists. There's still a coalition in this country for constitutional politics. There's still a majority that rejects this. And the response is already forming. Connecticut is launching a joint federal state effort to block ICE intimidation. Senator Padilla is pushing to ban federal agents from polling places. Civil rights groups have legal frameworks prepared. If this dead man's switch framework is wrong, we still defended voting access and public trust. Those are still wins in any functioning democracy. But if it's right, waiting for a dramatic big moment means waiting until after the damage lands. The hopeful truth is that Trump's dead man's switch can only work if we let him wire it up in the first place. So treat 2026 like a firebreak election. Track the SAVE Act. Back state officials who are preparing, and act like Donald J. Trump is going to do everything in his power to steal the 2026 midterm elections, because he is. I'm Rebecca Rowan, and this is For the Republic. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.